Chief Engineer Villar always believed in the sanctity of protocols. Rules governed everything aboard the station, from basic maintenance schedules to emergency reactor repairs. Following procedure was the key to survival, or so the Galactic Council said. But today, Villar was facing the unthinkable. The experimental gravity core, something no engineer dared touch, was rapidly destabilizing. Every manual suggested the same grim solution: a full system shutdown that would take 72 hours, cutting off life support and causing unimaginable chaos. Panic spread throughout the alien crew. "Summon the humans," someone whispered. "They've dealt with worse." Moments later, 5 humans arrived on the alien space station, each armed with only the most absurd items: a roll of duct tape, cups of steaming coffee, and a Bluetooth speaker. They exchanged cheerful greetings as if they had walked into a coffee shop instead of an interstellar emergency. Chief Villar's tendrils twitched in disbelief as one of the humans, a disheveled engineer named Sarah, surveyed the blinking reactor lights. She took a long sip from her coffee, squinting slightly. "Yeah," she muttered, "we've seen worse." Without any consultation or request for safety clearance, she pulled out a roll of duct tape and marched toward the reactor core. Villar's panic hit new heights. "You can't fix a gravity core with that," Sarah grinned, her eyes twinkling with the serene madness only humans seem to possess. "Watch me." Chief Engineer Villar's 8 eyes darted between the flashing alarms and the pulsing control panels in the central hub of the space station, Ignar's Hope. The alien station orbited a neutron star, an advanced outpost conducting dangerous experiments on gravity manipulation. Today's mission had been routine until the reactor went critical without warning. "Protocol 998A, emergency system shutdown," barked Officer Grikek, the station's head of safety. His antennae twitched nervously as he read from a thick emergency manual, flipping through pages as if their salvation was buried somewhere inside. "But a full shutdown will take 72 hours, Villar protested, his tendrils curling in frustration. "We won't survive that long. Life support will fail within 30 hours. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Villar could see the growing fear in their eyes. None of them had the training to handle something this catastrophic. Then someone whispered what everyone else was too afraid to say. "Maybe we should call the humans." Villar remembered the rumors. Every species in the Galactic Council shared stories about Earth's inhabitants, the so-called Death Worlders, who thrived on a planet of hurricanes, volcanoes, and wild predators. Legends claimed humans could survive without food or water for days, and some said they drank poison every morning just to wake up. Villar had laughed off most of these rumors as exaggerated nonsense, until now. The gravity reactor in front of him pulsed ominously, as if daring him to test his faith in protocols one last time. Grikek's manual slipped from his hands, pages fluttering to the floor. "We'll need to send a distress signal," Villar muttered reluctantly. Grikek tapped his mandibles nervously. "The humans will improvise. They don't follow regulations." Villar shivered. He had read enough reports to understand how unpredictable humans were. They ignored protocols, an unthinkable crime in galactic engineering. But maybe, just maybe, that recklessness was exactly what they needed. With a heavy sigh, Villar gave the order. "Call the humans." It didn't take long. Within a few hours, a small human shuttle docked at the station's airlock. Villar and his team watched with a mixture of relief and terror as 5 human engineers sauntered into the control room, each carrying bizarre items that made no sense in the context of the crisis. One human, Sarah, as she introduced herself, was dressed in a mismatched uniform, clutching a cup of coffee in one hand and a Bluetooth speaker in the other. Another human had a roll of duct tape tucked into his belt, as if it were sacred equipment. Villar stared at them in disbelief. Is that all you brought?" Sarah gave a casual shrug. "What, no coffee here?" she asked, her eyes scanning the control room. "You guys are missing out." The alien engineers exchanged bewildered glances. Coffee was one of the substances galactic biologists had classified as mildly toxic, yet here were humans drinking it as if it were life-sustaining. While the alien crew scrambled to update the humans on the gravity core's status, the human engineers seemed oddly unconcerned. Sarah leaned casually against the reactor console, sipping her coffee between glances at the readouts. Another human hummed a cheerful tune, completely unaffected by the sirens and flashing lights. "This is bad," Grkek whispered to Valar. "The gravity core is going critical, and they're just standing there." Before Valar could respond, one of the humans, the one with the duct tape, strolled up to the reactor control panel, inspecting it with a lazy grin. "You're overcomplicating it," he said, cutting off Grkek mid-sentence. "We've dealt with worse." "Worse?" Valar repeated, utterly baffled. "This core could collapse into a singularity at any moment." "Relax," Sarah said, waving him off. "We'll fix it, probably." The alien engineers could barely contain their panic. Valar clutched his tendrils, watching in horror as Sarah pulled off the reactor's outer casing without following any decontamination procedures. She casually set her coffee cup on the console and began fiddling with the exposed wiring. You didn't even sterilize it," Valar stammered, horrified. Sarah gave him a sideways glance. "Sterilize it? Nah, I think it's fine," Grkek gasped. "You can't think. There are protocols, procedures." Another human engineer chuckled. "Yeah, well, we've got duct tape. That's kind of our protocol." Valar was certain the entire station was moments away from annihilation. Yet somehow, these humans acted like they were fixing a broken toaster, not a reactor on the verge of collapsing into a black hole. As the human engineers worked, ignoring every safety measure the aliens tried to enforce, the alien crew hovered on the verge of complete panic. Grkek paced back and forth, muttering frantically about safety violations. "They're going to kill us all," Grkek hissed to Valar. "We should never have called them." Valar couldn't answer. His mind was trapped between two terrifying realities: the certainty of doom if they stuck to their own protocols, and the chaotic hope that maybe, just maybe, the humans knew something they didn't. Sarah looked up from the tangled mess of reactor wires, flashing Valar a grin. "Almost done. Just need a few more minutes and maybe another cup of coffee." Valar was beginning to regret ever sending the distress signal. The humans weren't just improvising. They were operating on a level of reckless insanity that no alien manual could ever have anticipated. Sarah had dismantled half the reactor console by now, humming a jaunty tune as she worked. She leaned over to her teammate, Frank, who was busy taping together wires that didn't look like they belonged together. "Hey, hand me the duct tape," Sarah said casually. Grkek's antennae shot up in alarm. You can't use adhesive tape on a quantum gravity core." Frank glanced up from his work, raising an eyebrow. "Why not? It holds everything else together." He tore off a strip of duct tape with a dramatic rip and slapped it onto the reactor. Valar's tendrils coiled tight in disbelief. That can't possibly be safe." Frank gave him a nonchalant shrug. "Neither is space travel, buddy." The alien crew clustered together, whispering frantically as they tried to make sense of the humans' actions. Valar could overhear snippets of the conversation. "They brought tape to fix a reactor," one engineer muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Maybe it's some kind of Earth technology we don't understand," whispered another. "They survived on that death world. They must know something we don't." Meanwhile, Grkek flipped through his emergency manual in a desperate attempt to find any mention of duct tape. When he found none, he groaned in frustration. "It's not in the manual. This isn't in any manual." The humans, oblivious to the aliens' panic, continued working. Sarah took another sip of coffee, then offered her cup to Valar. "You want some?" she asked cheerfully. "Might calm you down." Valar recoiled in horror. "Calm? That's a mild toxin. How are you still alive?" Sarah just grinned. "Adaptation, my friend." Zavor stood off to the side with a data pad, furiously documenting the humans' behavior. Every action they took seemed to defy reason, and yet nothing had gone catastrophically wrong, at least not yet. "They don't follow predictable logic," Zavor muttered to himself. "They appear to improvise everything on the spot. How do they survive with such inconsistency?" He added another observation. "Humans ignore basic safety protocols. Possible evolutionary trait?" Meanwhile, Grkek leaned over to Valar. "I think they're doing more harm than good. Look at them. They're not even using proper tools." "Shh," Valar hissed, watching in awe as Frank attached two dangerously incompatible components using nothing but zip ties and a hopeful expression. The tension in the room thickened as the reactor began to hum ominously, signaling the approach of a critical threshold. Alarm lights flashed, casting everything in a pulsing red glow. Sarah gave the reactor a quick glance. "Ah, it's fine," she said breezily. "That's just a warning hum." "A warning hum?" Valar sputtered. "The reactor is about to explode." "Nah," Sarah said, pulling her Bluetooth speaker out of her pocket and fiddling with the settings. "It's got at least 5 minutes before things get dicey. You guys mind if I play some music while we work?" Before Valar could respond, a song blasted from the tiny speaker, a loud, upbeat 80s rock anthem that seemed entirely out of place given the situation. Grikek stared at the humans in disbelief. Are they dancing?" Indeed, Sarah and Frank began bobbing their heads to the beat, occasionally exchanging grins, as if they were fixing a toaster instead of a reactor. Valar's patience was wearing thin. Every instinct told him that this was madness. They were on the verge of a complete reactor collapse, and the humans were acting like it was just another Tuesday. You must stop," Valar shouted, his tendrils twitching violently. "You don't understand the danger." Sarah gave him a wink. "Relax, Chief, we've got this." Frank added with a chuckle, "We fixed the International Space Station with duct tape. This thing's no big deal." Valar's jaw dropped. "You used adhesive tape in space?" "Yep." Frank grinned. "And gum. You'd be amazed what a little gum can do." The reactor groaned, and for a moment it seemed like everything was about to go catastrophically wrong. Sparks flew, and a harsh mechanical whine filled the air. "All right," Sarah said, her tone shifting to something slightly more serious. "Time to patch this baby up." She reached into her toolkit and pulled out the most unexpected item of all, a half-eaten candy bar. Valar stared in disbelief. What is that?" "Chocolate," Sarah said with a grin, breaking off a piece and eating it. "Gotta stay fueled. The rest is for the reactor." Before Valar could object, Sarah jammed the candy bar into a gap between two panels, using it to stabilize the wiring. The reactor's hum quieted instantly. "There we go," she said, dusting off her hands. "Good as new." For a moment, there was only stunned silence. The alien engineers stared at the reactor, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Had these humans really just fixed a reactor with duct tape and chocolate? Grikek looked like he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. This defies all logic." Valar, for the first time in his career, felt his sense of reality begin to crumble. How did you even think of that?" Sarah gave a casual shrug. "Sometimes you just gotta wing it." Frank grinned. "We call it improvisational engineering. Works every time." As the reactor stabilized, the humans high-fived each other, looking completely unfazed by what they had just accomplished. The alien crew, meanwhile, stood in silent awe, grappling with the realization that everything they thought they knew about engineering, and perhaps the universe itself, had just been turned upside down. Valar turned to Grikek, his voice hollow. "I think we need to rewrite our manuals." Grikek could only nod. "And stock up on chocolate." For a brief moment, it seemed as if the worst was behind them. The reactor had quieted, the alarm stopped blaring, and the station no longer vibrated ominously. Valar allowed himself a rare exhale. "I can't believe it. You actually stabilized the reactor." "Yup," Sarah said cheerfully, slapping her hands together. "Easy peasy." But just as she reached for her coffee, another alarm blared, louder and more urgent than the first. The lights in the room flickered violently, and the reactor began pulsing, a deep, rhythmic thrum that sent shivers through every alien present. "That's not good," Frank muttered, glancing at Sarah. Valar's eyes widened in panic. "What now?" Sarah frowned. "Looks like we've got a feedback loop?" "Yeah, that's definitely a feedback loop." "A feedback loop?" Valar gasped. "That wasn't in the diagnostic report." "Yeah," Sarah said with a shrug. "It never is." "We need to initiate a secondary shutdown. Follow protocol 427, BIA." Grikek flipped through his emergency manual so fast that some of the pages tore. "Protocol 427B requires authorization from the Galactic Safety Commission." We don't have time for that, Valar snapped. We have to, Grkek insisted. The regulations are clear. If we bypass authorization, we could face legal repercussions. Meanwhile, Sarah leaned casually against the reactor, sipping her coffee. You guys really need to loosen up, she said with a grin. You ever hear of winging it? Valar stared at her, horrified. Winging it? Frank nodded sagely. It's kind of our specialty. Just as the humans began brainstorming a solution, the reactor let out a violent surge, sending sparks flying across the room. The lights flickered, and a loud grinding noise echoed from the reactor's core. Uh-oh, Sarah muttered. We've got structural integrity failure on Deck 7. What does that mean? Valar demanded. Frank glanced at his datapad. It means parts of your station are probably about to break off. Valar's tendrils flared in panic. What? Relax, Sarah said calmly. We'll just patch it up. Grkek was losing what little composure he had left. With what? Adhesive tape again? Obviously, Frank said with a grin, and maybe a few zip ties. Just to be thorough, the alien engineers were on the verge of total collapse. Valar grabbed Sarah by the shoulder, his eyes wild with fear. You can't fix structural integrity with tape. Why not? Sarah asked, completely unbothered. It worked on the space station. And besides, duct tape is stronger than most things out there. But, no buts, Sarah interrupted, already pulling more tape from her tool belt. Trust me, we've got this. Valar turned to Grkek, desperate. We're all going to die, aren't we? Grkek nodded grimly. Most likely. Ignoring the aliens' protests, Sarah and her team sprinted toward Deck 7, leaving the alien engineers to follow in stunned silence. When they arrived, they found that part of the hull had already started to buckle, and one of the support beams had cracked. Perfect, Sarah said, clapping her hands. Hand me that roll of duct tape, would you? Frank tossed her the tape, and Sarah immediately went to work, wrapping it around the cracked beam with a precision that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times before. This is madness, Valar whispered, watching in disbelief. Absolute madness. Welcome to engineering, human style, Frank said with a grin. As the humans patched the hull, new alarms echoed through the station. Valar checked his datapad and groaned. The reactor core is destabilizing again. Sarah didn't even flinch. That's fine, we'll just restart it. Restart it, Valar cried. That could trigger a singularity. Frank gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Nah, probably not. Valar felt his sanity slipping away. Probably. Sarah shrugged. We've got a solid 50-50 chance. That is not reassuring, Grkek wailed. Back in the control room, Sarah fiddled with the reactor's control panel, tapping buttons, seemingly at random. Every time Valar tried to intervene, she brushed him off with a casual, "Trust me, I know what I'm doing. You're not even following the basic procedures." Valar shouted, his tendrils quivering. Sarah gave him a playful grin. That's the thing about procedures. They're more like guidelines, really. Valar was on the verge of a complete breakdown. Guidelines? Guidelines? Yeah, Frank added, giving the reactor a gentle thump. The universe doesn't play by the rules, so neither do we. Just as Sarah hit the final sequence on the control panel, the reactor emitted a low, ominous hum. The alien engineers held their breath, waiting for the end. Then, nothing. The hum faded, the lights stabilized, and the reactor settled into a steady rhythm. Sarah leaned back with a satisfied grin. There we go, all patched up. Valar blinked, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. You fixed it? Yep, Sarah said, cracking open another coffee, and with 5 minutes to spare. The alien engineers stared at the humans, completely dumbfounded. Nothing about what had just happened made any sense, and yet the station was safe. Grkek slumped against the wall, his antenna drooping. We're going to have to rewrite every safety manual in existence. Valar nodded slowly. And we'll need to add duct tape to the emergency kits. Frank grinned. Now you're getting it. The reactor hummed quietly now, the once dangerous gravity core stable and glowing a soft, reassuring blue. For the first time in hours, the alarms were silent. Valar slumped into a chair, his 8 limbs hanging limp in exhaustion. Around him, the alien engineers sat in stunned silence, too overwhelmed to process what they had just witnessed. The humans, by contrast, were already celebrating. Frank leaned against the reactor console, sipping from a fresh cup of coffee. Sarah gave the patched-up reactor one last slap, as if it were an old friend, before settling into a relaxed pose. "Good as new," she declared cheerfully. Valar's mind raced in circles, unable to reconcile the events of the past few hours with everything he had been taught. How could humans, with their reckless disregard for protocol, have succeeded where careful planning had failed? "It doesn't make sense," he muttered aloud, more to himself than anyone else. "You ignored every safety procedure. You didn't follow any of the protocols. How did you survive?" Sarah grinned. "It's a gift." Frank chuckled. "Yeah, we kind of thrive on chaos." Grkek, still clutching his emergency manual like a lifeline, shook his head in disbelief. "This isn't logical. There has to be a scientific explanation for how you fixed everything with tape and snacks." One of the other alien engineers chimed in tentatively. "Perhaps humans possess some form of intuitive engineering? A talent for improvisation that we cannot understand?" Valar shook his head. "But that's madness." Sarah leaned back in her chair, placing her feet on the console, as if they hadn't just narrowly averted disaster. "See, the thing is, the universe? It's messy. Rules are great until something blows up in your face." Frank raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "And when that happens, you roll with it." Valar stared at them, dumbfounded. "You mean you survive by ignoring the rules?" Sarah gave him a thoughtful smile. "Not ignoring, bending, making new ones when the old ones don't work." The room fell silent as the aliens absorbed this new philosophy. Make new rules? Such an idea was heretical to creatures raised in a society built on rigid protocols and unchanging regulations. Grkek, who had spent most of the crisis on the verge of a breakdown, finally lowered his emergency manual. "I thought humans were reckless," he muttered, "but now I see. You're not reckless, you're adaptable." Sarah winked. "You got it." Valar, still struggling with the enormity of what he had witnessed, looked at the humans with newfound respect and a little fear. I think you're dangerous." Frank laughed. "We get that a lot." Valar's thoughts spiraled deeper. If the humans had solved the crisis by breaking every rule, what did that say about the alien way of life? Were their protocols truly the pinnacle of safety and efficiency? Or had they become chains, holding them back from solutions hidden in plain sight? Dr. Zavor, the station's chief scientist, stared at the reactor, mumbling to himself. Perhaps we need to reconsider our reliance on strict procedures. Maybe there is value in improvisation." Valar turned to him, horrified. "You can't mean that." Zavor gave him a slow, deliberate nod. I do." Just as the conversation teetered on the edge of existential dread, Sarah stood up, stretching her arms. "All right, crisis averted. Time to head home. Frank, grab the duct tape, will you?" Frank gave her a thumbs up and began gathering their tools, whistling a cheerful tune as if nothing unusual had happened. Grkek stared at them in disbelief. You're just leaving? After everything you did, you're not even going to file a report?" Sarah smirked. "Nah, we'll let you handle that. You guys seem to love paperwork." Grkek let out a soft groan, clutching his antennae. I need to lie down." As the humans prepared to leave, Valar approached Sarah hesitantly. I don't understand how you did it, but thank you. Without you, we would have been lost." Sarah gave him a warm smile. "No problem, Chief. Just doing what we do best." "This duct tape of yours, how does it work?" Sarah grinned. "It just does." Valar nodded slowly, as if that answer, in its own strange way, made perfect sense. "I think I'll order some for the station." Frank clapped him on the back. "Good call." As the humans boarded their shuttle, Valar turned to his crew, still grappling with the implications of what they had witnessed. "Humans," he whispered to himself. They live in chaos, and somehow they thrive." Grkek nodded solemnly. "We should keep them on speed dial." Dr. Zavor glanced at the reactor, still stabilized by duct tape and a candy bar, and shook his head in disbelief. "I don't think we'll ever understand them." Valar gave him a tired smile. "Perhaps we're not supposed to." Just as the humans finish gathering their tools, an ear-splitting alarm blares across the station. Red lights flash once again, and Valar's datapad pings with the worst possible news. The reactor is stabilizing, Valar began, then froze in disbelief. But the gravity core is now generating an unstable singularity, Grkek gasped. It's pulling in everything within range. Sarah took a calm sip of her coffee, not even flinching at the word singularity. Well, that's new. New? This could destroy the entire station. Sarah gave him a nonchalant shrug. Probably. But we've got what, a good 5 minutes before it collapses? Grkek nearly fainted. 5 minutes? Frank grinned. Relax, buddy, that's plenty of time. Valar frantically scrolled through the emergency procedures. We need to shut everything down. Follow Protocol 999. Full core isolation. Grkek, pale and trembling, nodded vigorously. Yes, we must seal the core and wait for a rescue team. Sarah gave them a bemused look. Yeah, no time for that. But the protocol, Valar started. Look, Sarah interrupted, setting her coffee aside. You stick to your protocols, and I'll stick to not getting us all sucked into a black hole, okay? Valar felt his sanity slipping. That is not how engineering works. Sarah winked. It is now. With 4 minutes left until singularity collapse, the human and alien crews spring into action, although not without a fair amount of tension. We need to stabilize the gravity field, Sarah explained, typing furiously into the reactor console. But the field generators are fried, so we'll need to manually redirect the field. Valar blinked. Manually? That's impossible. Frank smirked. Not with zip ties and duct tape, it isn't. Valar groaned. You can't solve every problem with duct tape. Watch us, Frank shot back, already rummaging through his toolkit. Despite their differences, the two teams gradually found a rhythm. Frank and Grkek argued about safety protocols until Frank handed him a cup of coffee to calm him down. Sarah and Valar bickered about the use of duct tape, but Valar finally gave in and held the tape while Sarah worked. Even as they argued, the aliens realized that the humans' reckless creativity complemented their own methodical approach. Valar, muttering under his breath, finally admitted, this might actually work. With 2 minutes left on the clock, the singularity began pulling in loose objects, panels, tools, and even part of Sarah's Bluetooth speaker. Hey, she shouted, diving after it. That thing cost me $20. Frank slapped a piece of duct tape across the control panel with a grin. All right, the core's stabilized. Mostly. Valar stared at the mess of wires, tape, and coffee-stained circuits. How is this even holding together? Physics is just a suggestion, Sarah quipped. You just gotta make it work. Just as the team celebrated their progress, a new alarm blared. The gravity field began oscillating uncontrollably. This reactor's going to overload, Valar shouted. We need 48 hours to safely shut it down. We've got 2 minutes, Sarah corrected. Good enough. Good enough? Grkek cried. Sarah gave a wild grin. We've survived worse. The reactor groaned ominously, and sparks flew from the panel. Valar and Grkek backed away in terror, but Sarah and Frank leaned in closer. All right, Sarah muttered. Time for the Hail Mary. Frank handed her the last roll of duct tape. Sarah gave it a reverent look, then slapped it across the reactor core with a satisfying thwack. The alarm stopped instantly. The core let out a low hum, stabilizing at last. Valar stared in disbelief. You fixed it? Sarah grinned. Of course. Duct tape saves the day, again. As the reactor settled into a steady rhythm, the alien crew slumped in exhausted disbelief. Valar rubbed his temples, feeling both relief and confusion. This should not have worked. Frank clapped him on the back. You're welcome. Grkek sat down heavily, muttering to himself. I need a vacation, a very long vacation. As the humans gathered their tools, Valar approached Sarah, still trying to make sense of it all. I don't understand, he admitted. You ignored every protocol, defied every safety measure. How did you know it would work? Sarah smiled. We didn't. Valar blinked. You didn't? Nope, Sarah said, packing up her coffee mug. But sometimes you just have to try something crazy and see what happens. Valar stared at her, stunned. That is terrifying. Yep, Frank agreed with a grin. But it works. As the humans boarded their shuttle, ready to leave, Valar turned to Grkek. Maybe there's something to learn from them, Valar said thoughtfully. They survive not because they follow rules, but because they make their own. Grkek nodded slowly. Next time we're in trouble, We should call the humans first. The reactor hummed quietly, stable once again, as the alien engineers and the humans gathered in the control room. The alarms were finally silenced, and the danger had passed, but the emotional fallout was just beginning. Valar sat heavily on a bench, rubbing his tendrils, his mind still reeling from the chaotic series of events. Grkek sat beside him, his antennae drooping in exhaustion. "We should be dead," Grkek muttered. Valar nodded slowly. "By all logical reasoning, yes." Across the room, Sarah leaned casually against the wall, sipping the last of her coffee. She gave Frank a satisfied grin. "Not bad for a Tuesday." Frank chuckled. Could have been worse. Valar's tendrils twitched in disbelief. Could have been worse. A singularity nearly consumed the station. Sarah gave him a sympathetic smile. "Yeah, but it didn't." Grkek watched the humans with a mix of confusion and admiration. How do you live like this, so recklessly?" Sarah shrugged. "You get used to it." Valar gave a soft sigh, feeling something strange, something like respect, bubbling up inside him. He had spent his entire career following strict rules, but today those rules had nearly killed them all. And yet, these humans, with their reckless improvisation, had somehow saved the day. "You're different," Valar admitted reluctantly. Sarah grinned. "Thanks. I meant it as an observation, not a compliment," Valar added quickly, though there was no malice in his voice. Frank gave him a friendly nudge. "You'll get the hang of it." Grkek groaned softly. "I don't think I want to get the hang of it." With the crisis resolved, the humans began packing up their tools, preparing to return to their ship. As they did, Sarah pulled out a spare roll of duct tape and handed it to Valar. "For next time," she said with a wink. Valar stared at the roll, feeling oddly honored. "Thank you, I think." Grkek gave a small, resigned sigh. "This is how it begins. First duct tape, and then chaos." As the humans boarded their shuttle, Valar stood by the airlock, watching them go. Something had shifted within him, something he couldn't quite name. For the first time in his life, he felt hopeful. Sarah gave him a parting grin. "Call us if you need more impossible things fixed." Valar nodded solemnly. "I suspect we will." Frank leaned out of the airlock, grinning. "Don't forget the coffee next time." Valar gave a rare, genuine smile. "We'll consider it." As the human shuttle detached from the station, Valar and Grkek stood silently in the airlock, watching it disappear into the void. "They're remarkable," Valar said quietly. "They're insane," Grkek replied, though without the disdain he once held. "Perhaps," Valar mused, "but maybe that's what we need." Grkek tilted his head, considering the idea. "Do you think we'll ever be like them?" Valar shook his head with a soft chuckle. "I hope not. One batch of humans is enough." Back in the control room, the alien engineers resumed their duties, but things felt different. The manuals, once held as sacred texts, now seemed like guidelines, helpful but not infallible. Valar placed the roll of duct tape on the console, where it sat like a trophy, a reminder of the impossible day they had just survived. "Do you think they'll come back?" one of the younger engineers asked. Valar gave a small, enigmatic smile. "I hope so." As the control room settled into a new normal, one of the engineers hesitated, holding up the emergency manual. "Chief, should we update the protocols?" Valar glanced at the manual, then at the roll of duct tape sitting proudly on the console. "Yes," he said. "Add a new section. In case of emergency, call a human." One clause stood out. "In extreme emergencies, disregard all safety protocols. Apply duct tape as necessary." He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. What have we become? Across the station, small but telling changes were taking root. The emergency kits now included rolls of duct tape and instant coffee packets, a decision that had sparked fierce debate among the engineers, though Valar insisted on their inclusion. In the break room, Grkek had finally given in to curiosity and tried a cup of coffee. He took a hesitant sip, grimacing at the bitterness, but he no longer recoiled at the sight of it. "This is horrible," he muttered, though he took another sip. Word of the humans' exploits had spread beyond the station. Throughout the Galactic Council, alien crews whispered about the reckless humans who had stabilized a reactor with duct tape and candy bars. Some called them heroes, others called them madmen. Valar knew the truth. They were both. One day, while reviewing long-range sensor data, Valar received a message from the humans. A friendly, informal update. "Hey Valar, just checking in. If you ever need more impossible things fixed, you know where to find us. Don't forget to stock up on coffee and tape, Sarah." He couldn't help but smile as he read it. "Humans," he whispered, shaking his head. "They're going to be the end of us." As Valar prepared to log the message, Grekek wandered into the control room, looking mildly annoyed. "Chief, I've run the latest simulations on the reactor upgrades." "And?" Valar asked. Grekek threw up his hands in exasperation. "They only work if we factor in duct tape. Every other solution fails." Valar chuckled softly. "Welcome to the new era, Grekek." Above the reactor, a new plaque had been installed, a tribute to the humans who had saved the station. It read, "In chaos we trust." Valar stared at it for a moment, a mix of pride and bewilderment washing over him. "I can't believe we let them leave that here." Grekek sighed. "It could have been worse." Valar gave him a knowing look. "Yes, they could have stayed." He gave it a respectful nod. "Next time, we'll be ready."